Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you've had a great day talking about all aspects of production. Got a few people here, small audience. We'll try and crack on through. I know everyone's keen to get out into the sunshine, out of the dark. But yeah, just run through a little bit of things about LED systems, and particularly we're going to talk about the future, what developments are coming. So we've been talking a lot about virtual production today, all the different aspects of it. We are really going to be focusing on the in-camera VFX part and the in-camera VFX part using LED. So to start off with, who am I? What is Brompton? So you can kind of think of Brompton as, if you like, the brains behind the LED screen. So we've actually got a really nice Brompton-driven LED screen here. And what the Brompton system's doing is really taking that video signal from whatever your upstream video system is and getting it onto the screen. But it's getting it onto the screen while giving the best possible quality. Our background is really in live events. That's where we started. But since day one for Brompton, live events have involved cameras. So our system's been camera aware from the start. And that meant when people started looking at using LED screens for virtual production, that Brompton was the obvious place to go, and we've had a very, very strong history doing that. So at Brompton, we've actually been doing virtual production from the beginning. We started with those earliest shows. We've been doing it since 2019, and we're still going strong. We've got volumes that are still being used for production today. So we've got this lovely quote from one of our users, Peter Canning, who basically said, having used Brompton on the highest level TV shows, that the LED processing systems basically just work. That's the bit they don't have any problems with. Their problems are solved. Right, Brompton's done. Right, let's all go home. Well, maybe not quite. But what are the new innovations that are going to lead to the next steps forward in camera visual effects? And I want to focus today on three areas, really. How do we improve quality? How can we make things more efficient? And how can we get better workflows? And there are three things I'm going to talk about today. The first is new panel designs. So how are the panels themselves actually evolving? What two new technologies are coming along? Both in the panels themselves, the drive systems, etc. The second is video as lighting. So improving the quality of the lighting that we're getting from these screens. And the third is next generation control protocols. There's a lot of development in this area which is going to improve a whole load of workflows. So new panel designs. Well, what do we need for new panel designs? For a next-gen panel, we need a next-gen receiver card. And this is the Brompton G1 receiver card launched earlier in the year. This is an incredibly powerful receiver card. It gives us the future-proof technology platform that we need for the future. So it's about 20 times more powerful than existing receiver cards. It can drive much larger, much finer LED panels, and it can drive them faster at up to 1,000 frames a second, enabling real slow motion shots to be able to be done in volumes for the first time. As part of this, we now run 10 gig fiber straight to the panel. So we have a much, much fatter pipe between the panels. It means more in a chain, less cabling, just simplifies the whole workflow and gives a lot more power. What kind of things could this enable? Well, a single G1 can actually drive an LED panel that's 720p on its own. So it's pretty crazily powerful. These higher res panels are really going to enable quicker setup times, simpler systems, physically smaller studios. So in an LED system at the moment, you need to have enough distance so you don't get moire from the camera sensor interacting with the LED pixels. So these G1-based panels are really going to change what LED volumes look like. They can get a lot smaller, the density can get a lot higher. Probably the most game-changing thing that's coming out that's going to really see potential renewed investment in LED volumes is video as lighting. So in a virtual production volume, the display forms basically has three purposes. It's a background, enabling us to get a shot in one go with our background fully there, not having to be comped in post. It's a source of reflections, and it's also a source of light, particularly diffuse lighting. But the problem is that LED screens use RGB. So we use RGB in displays because it corresponds to the eye's receptors. Our RG and B drive values can combine to produce any visible color because we see in RGB. But just because we can make the same color doesn't mean we can make the same spectrum. So these two spectra might produce pretty much the exact same color when direct viewed, but they obviously have a completely different quality. The RGB spectra is very spiky and discontinuous, whereas a real daylight spectra, even though it might be the same color, is much smoother. And that manifests itself as very poor color rendering, the ability of a light source to reproduce colors faithfully. We can do lots of things to try and improve this. We can use LEDs with broader spectral output, but that means we're reducing our color gamut, reducing the saturated colors we can produce. So that means that in scenes that want very saturated colors, our display won't be able to produce them. So if we've got a very saturated color in our virtual scene. So at Brompton, we developed a technology called True Light for this, which is all about adding extra emitters to our LED panels. I'm just going to play a short clip about that, and then I will go into some more detail. Seen some of those clips, this has a pretty profound effect on the lighting quality that we see. So I'm just going to dive into that in a little bit more detail. And first, I'm just going to show you some images. So this is an image taken under this broad spectrum illumination. These images are not retouched at all, so we're trying to show you exactly what you'd see. So if I was able to demonstrate this to you now this is what you would see if we were, say, illuminating me with this kind of technology. So this is RGB. Nice broadband illumination, nice smooth look, quite natural colors. Now I'm going to flip to what we're actually getting at the moment. So this is what it looks like under RGB. And if I just switch back and forth, you can really see that quite profound color shift. The skin looks really unnatural. Red is massively overhyped. And that's all because of these discontinuities in the spectrum. A slightly more subtle example, but just as profound, is the effect it has on darker skin tones. So again, if I flip back and forth between this narrow band light, so this is what all your LED volumes look like at the moment. This is what you're fighting against in terms of this poor color rendering quality. And this is what they could look like. So this is a really, really important difference that we really need to work on. In terms of a slightly more scientific measure, this is what a kind of color checker chart would look like under this illumination. So you can see, particularly our reds are very oversaturated when they're under RGB illumination. They pop completely differently to the other primaries. We also see pretty profound effects in magenta and cyan. And you can also see, it is subtle, but it's there, that our skin tone chips are shifted. Orange is also really blown out. The reds are pushed forward. So it really has quite a profound effect in color rendering. So what are these actual panels? What do they look like? Well, here's an actual real-world example of these LED spectra. And what we've done here is we've added to each pixel, rather than having just red, green, and blue emitters, we've got a fourth emitter, and that's white. And as you can see, this really smooths out that spectrum, and that's contributing to this improved quality that we're seeing. So these are real spectra from a real panel that exists. The first one is made by a company called Rowe. It's the CB5 RGBW, but there'll be lots more panels coming on the market as well. So in order to make this workflow work really well, calibration is really, really important. So the real benefit of this is that you can have your plates or your real-time rendered content, and you can plug that straight into your lighting source, these LED panels, and get good quality light out without having to fight it. So we've seen this in a lot of tests that we've been doing. You know, you can take a very straightforward workflow, and because the lighting quality is immediately correct, you don't have to go through a huge number of iterations trying to get lighting to compensate for the fact that the quality of the light's wrong. Then you might have nice broadband emitters from, say, some ARRI lights, but they're the wrong color. They don't immediately match the scene. So by using this fully calibrated technology, we immediately jump to the correct lighting. Now, Brompton is pretty unique in the LED control space because we developed our own calibration system, the Hydra system. And although that initially shipped to work with RGB panels, it's actually fully extensible to this fourth emitter. Because Brompton's system is also very dynamic, we're able to then offer a full set of controls, which which apparently are not showing up, which gives a lot more flexibility in how the solution is deployed. There's a lot of things you might need to tune in your system, particularly camera, spectral response, etc. So in Brompton, because of dynamic calibration, we're able to give all that flexibility. And finally, because I'm an engineer, I couldn't possibly leave you without some real data from this first panel. So you can see here the measured spectrum of the panel. And then these are some metrics for color rendering. So we've got some CRI measurements and also TM30, a more modern measurement. The fidelity score from TM30, if anyone's familiar with that, goes from 62 to 80 out of 100. So it's a very meaningful improvement in terms of the color rendering. The other aspect for these displays, which is actually very interesting, is that they actually use less power. So it's much more efficient to produce white light using a white emitter than it is using red, green, and blue. So we're seeing about 10 to 20% less power draw producing pale colors with these kinds of technologies. So finally, I want to talk about next-gen control protocols and next-gen video protocols. So this is an area where there's a lot of discussion and development, and if you talk to people in the industry, they're going to tell you that these are great new protocols, you should move to using them. And I'm going to just offer some sort of words of warning really about that. So video over IP is the next big thing in virtual production. It has this amazing potential for workflow development and to offer creative solutions, but it's also going to offer great pain. So we've got a couple of protocols to talk about. SMPTE 2110, the SMPTE standard from broadcast, and IPMX, which has kind of come from the Pro AV industry. And these are two new IP video standards. So replacing our traditional baseband video using HDMI, DisplayPort, or SDI, we're now using networks to do this. But there are lots of interesting problems that aren't really very well solved yet. So how do we interact with cameras? How do we get Genlock? How do we synchronize with cameras? How do we get legacy Genlock out of our systems to synchronize with monitors or other equipment that's on stage? And how does Genlock phase work? It's a really important tool to tune the phase of your camera and your LED screen together to get the correct results in virtual production. And there are a lot of common misconceptions about these technologies. Number one being that it's going to solve all my problems. Custom resolutions, which are very commonly employed in these workflows, are now easy, and that it's going to be lower latency. And unfortunately, none of these are really true. They can be true in some specific circumstances, but in general, they're not. But having said that, and having been a little bit negative, the potential for workflows using IP video is absolutely incredible. So by using a composable network, we can route things much more flexibly. Instead of having to have big, very expensive production switches, we can route things over a network. We have incredible flexibility and power. It can be much more cost effective. The hardware is more generic and commoditized. So certainly in the long run, I think we'll see these video systems being very, very cost effective. And it gives us the ability to very easily send metadata around our system. Amazing things like sharing camera frustra, viewing angle metadata, all sorts of things in these virtual production systems can be moved around. And we also have a centralized concept of time. So when we're generating this metadata, we can pass it around really time-stamped. And you can even think of really quite incredible workflows using like traditional key and fill, where we could pick the correct color bit depths and color formats for our signals that are actually appropriate to them, rather than passing around a key channel, which is essentially black and white, over a full RGB pipeline. We can just send a black and white image around. So that was a very brief run through of what we think the future holds at Brompton, the next generation workflows. I've kept it short because I know people are eager to go and have a drink and mingle. That's all from me. Very happy to answer any questions. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to be back in this room again tomorrow, and we're going to, unless you want, did you want to take some questions? Do you guys have questions? Anyone have questions? Yeah? Okay, yeah. Sorry.
So since you're connecting with 10 gig Ethernet, what sort of display cards are coming out of the computers that are generating the images?
What was the question about 10 gig Ethernet?
Okay, so the cards that the new encoders that you have, they're Ethernet based.
Yep.
As opposed to DisplayPort or HDMI. So what kind of cards in the machines are you guys recommending then?
Right. So yeah, great question. So there's that's one of the areas where there's massive development, right? So we've got a lot of traditional GPUs that have got their standard baseband video outputs, and we're moving away from that. So on the virtual production side, NVIDIA kind of is the standard. So NVIDIA acquired a networking company called Mellanox a while ago. And what they've done, which is actually really, really cool, is they've married together Mellanox's high-speed networking cards with their GPUs. So they have an API that would allow you to have a GPU and these networking cards in the machine sitting together, and it will pull the data straight off the GPU and squirt it out over the network card. So that's sort of what we're seeing in virtual production. On the other side, there are now playout cards. We've got people like Blackmagic developing cards that will allow similar to your traditional decklink card to play out over 2110. And there's also a lot of converters on the market. So I think we will see, to start with, a lot of people outputting traditional baseband video and then converting it into these systems.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things I noticed over at Paramount Animation, we have Christie projectors, for example. And the projectors can display up to 16 bits of color.
Yep.
But we don't have a way to get it there, because I'm looking like at Nuke or Final Images, and they're 16-bit half float. But DisplayPort is 10-bit. So you're immediately chopping off all of this extra data that would look great, and I assume that's a big issue for virtual production screens as well, since if you can't transport the image information, you're not going to get your complete bit depth.
Exactly, and by using these IP techniques rather than having, baseband video tends to be quite inflexible in terms of, the pixel formats that are supported or color bit depth or whatever. So that's certainly an advantage of moving to these IP workflows, that the protocols are then much more flexible. They're able to be developed, and you could, for instance, have a 16-bit signal.
That would be amazing. Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question about your the spectrum that you showed. So the RGB clearly was very spiky, and the RGBW was much smoother, but it also seemed that it wasn't driving as much red. So is the red LED and also the white just trying to minimize that?
Yep. So the way that our system works, and the way that you need to drive these signals in order to respect the video colorimetry, the video signal that's telling you what to output, is that you kind of need to convert the color data back into what the observer is going to see. So you're essentially going from RGB input, and then you're figuring out which XY color that should correspond to, and then we then convert that again into a drive level for RG and B. So you're absolutely right. If I go back to this spectra, so what we see, sorry, if we could switch to my slides, that would be just very briefly. Thank you. So what we see with this particular panel design is that this is the trace that is the white emitter. So this is our fourth emitter. And what this manufacturer has chosen is a very warm white. So there's a lot of red. So the color we're trying to produce here is actually white, relatively close to D65, so 6500 Kelvin. And in order to produce that color using this emitter, we don't actually need any red. We've got plenty of red. What we need to do is add green and blue to balance out that very warm white and get the correct color. So what our system actually does is it does that in real time for every single pixel, and figures out, given the color we're trying to reproduce and some other parameters about how you're asking the system to drive. So in this configuration on the right-hand side, what we've done is we've asked the system to use as much of our fourth emitter as possible to give us the most broadband. We figure out in real time for every pixel how to drive it, how much of the fourth emitter we can add while still producing the exact color that the video signal is telling us.
I think we have time for one more question. Over there? Okay.
Part of your presentation, you talked about misconception being lower latency with 2110.
Yep.
And can you say a little bit more about that in a scenario where you had fiber coming out of a GPU going to a processor and fiber from the processor to the panel? Conceivably, why would your latency not be improved?
So I think this is there are definitely situations where you could see improved latency. So with video signals, latency is really about how long does it take to send a frame from A to B, and a lot of systems will end up needing to buffer that entire frame, so they can't send it on until they've received the whole thing. But in terms of, say, actually sending some data from A to B, what defines latency is how quickly you can do it, right, the bandwidth. So let's say I've got a 4K video signal, it's 12 gigabits a second, and I have HDMI 2.0, which is 12 gigabits a second. It's going to take me 1 second to send my video signal, right? If I have a fatter pipe, so let's say I've got 100 gig Ethernet, I can now send my data in 1/10 of the time. So I can either choose to send the same amount of data quicker, or I can choose to send 10 times as much data and it takes the same amount of time. So it's kind of basically about how the systems are configured. If you move to video standards that support more bandwidth, you can use them to send the data off for the previous generation quicker. But if you want to use their whole bandwidth, it still takes that much time to send the data from A to B. So that's the reason why I think there's sort of this conception that it will be lower latency. Now, if you can skip some of those copying steps, then that's going to help you to improve your latency a lot. But all the systems that are on the market at the moment don't do any of that. They'll tell you, they'll give you a load of marketing buzzwords saying, oh yeah, it's lower latency, but it's not, because it still takes the same amount of time to send the data from A to B.
Well, thank you so much, Adrian. You're going to be around tomorrow as well?
I'm afraid we are not around tomorrow, but I'm sure you'll have a great day.
All right, well, then definitely come up and talk to Adrian now, and don't be latent to the mixer. We have sorry, I couldn't help myself. 5:30 to 8:30 today, and then tomorrow we have a great rap party as well with the Spasmatics. So definitely come back tomorrow for more great content in Stage 1, which has the best host, and also great content in the main stage as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks, Adrian.